Welcome to Q&A practice. We'll start out with the court. Ready? Here we go. All right, let's go back on the record. In People versus Newton, all parties are present, represented as before. All right, counsel, yesterday during the 11-18 motion, I was asked to rule on the sufficiency of the people's case with respect to the motion that count 4 to the extent that it was an accomplice supported by accomplice testimony was adequately corroborated. I did some additional reading last night, and I will cite you both to People versus Price, found at 1 Cal 4th 324, and a quote from Price I do believe is pertinent to this proceeding. The existence of a conspiracy may be proved by uncorroborated accomplice testimony. Corroboration of accomplice testimony is needed only to connect the defendant to the conspiracy. And Price cites two People versus Cooks, a 1983 case found at 141 Cal App 3rd 224, specifically page 312 for that proposition. I think to put things more cogently, the court's responsibility in making a determination, which is a twofold determination here, is to determine whether or not there is some evidence from which a reasonable jury could conclude that the statement was adequately corroborated. The value of that corroborative evidence, however, is solely the province of the jury. I'm trying to state a little bit more articulately and concisely that which I stated yesterday. I do believe there is evidence from which a reasonable jury may conclude that the conspiracy is adequately corroborated. What weight, if any, they give that evidence that I've already articulated is entirely up to them. All right, prior to coming in, Mr. Lane, Mr. Davis asked me if it would be all right if he remained up at the witness stand when Sergeant Jacobs is called to the stand by him in this case for purposes of refreshing recollection, because he believes that it will be several areas where he may need to refresh recollection. You have a position with respect to that? No, we actually talked about that like we do every morning, trying to figure out the best way to go about this case. I'm fine with that. All right, then that won't be a problem. The only time I find it a problem is if, well, I don't think it will be a problem unless the discourse between any attorney and a witness on the stand starts to become heated. I will ask the attorney to return to the podium to ask questions. Thank you. All right, and so anything else that we need to take up at this time? No, Your Honor, no. You want to address that one stipulation, how we want to handle it? Oh yeah, it doesn't need to be on the record though, but since we're here, defense counsel called me up this morning and asked me if I would stipulate to the fact that Deborah Rankin tried to get a hold of Jack Newton from the jail in LA. Counsel forgot to ask that question, I guess, from Deborah Rankin, and I know that there's no way he could bring Deborah Rankin back here now. You know, he's been generous in seeking the truth out, and so I think it's the right position that I do also. All right, so have you, this sounds to me like it's one that you probably should reduce to writing. I agree, yeah, because it's going to be very factually specific. That way, both sides know exactly what's going to be said to the jury before it's actually said. So, Mr. Davis, since you're the one who wants it, why don't you prepare it? And Mr. Lane, you can review it. Okay. Thank you, Your Honor. All right, and so if we find ourselves in a position where you're wanting to rest subjective to the introduction of exhibits and that stipulation has not been prepared yet, I would expect that the motion that the rest subject to the introduction of exhibits would also include subject to the final preparation and approval of that stipulation. If you're able to stipulate, then we will deal with what's necessary in order to get the evidence before the jury in a timely fashion. Are we ready to bring the jury in then? Yes, let's bring the jury in. Right, now for some more Q&A practice. We'll start with plaintiff attorney. Ready? Here we go. All right, and what was the next task that you were asked to perform that day? Well, Brett Lewis and I left that immediate area to take some general overall photos of the salvage yard while Bill was doing the latent print processing on that vehicle. When we arrived back, we had the request for the use of our sifting equipment. There was a burn pit behind the garage that they wanted to use our sifting equipment on, and who was asking for your help, and in particular your sifting equipment. That was Special Agent Tom Sturd. Can you describe this sifting equipment for us? It's 3 aluminum poles to hit together to form a tripod, stands about 6 feet tall. There are chains coming down from the center top of the tripod to which we attach an aluminum frame so it kind of can swing within the tripod, and on that aluminum frame we can put different size mesh. You put the materials on top of the mesh, and you can use a trowel or a broom or just shaking, whatever works best for the material. And then the particles or bits that won't fall through the screen you can collect and examine. The bits that fell through the screen, we put a tarp under there and save those for later analysis if needed. Do you use different types of screens? In this case, I believe we used 2 different types of screens. And about what time did you begin to assist with the sifting of the material from the burn pit? That was about 3 p.m. All right, and generally, would you describe for us how you worked the scene there? There were, in addition to Tom Sturd, there were some other uniformed officers present at the scene. Our team got our sifting equipment, set it up, and I have had some experience with excavating grave sites before, so I knew how to dig into the material we wanted to sift without bashing it up and ruining it. So we have a small square-nosed flat shovel, and the ground under the ash in this area was very hard and packed, and so I moved material onto the shovel onto the sifter. The other officers and Bill Cates were there picking through the materials. Quite often they would ask me, does this look like a bone? I said, if there's any question, put it in the box. So we collected a lot of material from that. All right, sifting. Tell us about your experience in terms of excavating a site like this. Earlier that summer, we had a case where it was a homicide and the body had been attempted to be burned in a fire ring. It wasn't a complete destruction of the body, and then pieces of it had been buried. So I had earlier that summer been involved with excavating the ash material in that pit and also with the excavation of the burial site, and I had previously done at least 2 other just straight burial sites without burning involved. Tom Sturd indicated to me that he had been also involved in some burn where victims had been burned. In terms of your experience then, describe for us how the material was actually taken from the pit and what efforts you made so as not to unduly disturb the site or to damage any of the material that you were removing. Tell us how you managed that. Well, we used the flat shovel to slide underneath it on the hard ground to collect things. We also used a mason's trowel to gently excavate and loosen the material and then place it onto the screen. And at that point, we had additional mason's trowels and whisk brooms available to move the material to let the smaller materials fall through the screen, and then you could examine the material that remained on top of the screen. All right, who actually did the shovel work, as it were, and who did the actual picking through what was placed in the sifter? I believe I did most of the shovel work. My photographer also did some shoveling. I don't recall anyone else doing shovel work. And did you have, or were you aided with lights to conduct this task on that? No, we didn't have any lights. What time did you? We used flashlights. Thank you. What time did you cease that work? It was about 5 p.m. I would like to show you exhibit number 50 with the exception of the presence of the dog, I think previously identified as Skip. Is that a true and accurate portrayal of the pit? Yeah, this is the area where we excavated that grayish colored material and sifted it. May the record reflect the witness has identified a darkened gray area he used, which is depicted in the bottom part of Exhibit 50. Does the defense agree? Yes. Very well, the record will so reflect. To whom were the items given that were recovered from this sifting process on Tuesday evening? To the Landers County Sheriff's Department evidence technicians. Do you recall any non-biological material material of interest that you may have seen that Tuesday evening during the process. There were some metallic items present also. Maybe, I don't recall specifically, but things like zipper pulls, snaps, rivets. Certainly there were a lot of the cording from tires present. There was a large, looked like this bench seat from a vehicle that had been burned. We're going to zoom out on Exhibit 50 here. When it became dark and you ceased operations on the burn pit, what did you do next? At that point, we turned over all the evidence that we had collected thus far to the Landers County Sheriff's Department. We were preparing to leave the scene, but before we left, it was requested that we do a luminol treatment of a couple of residences on the property. We will stop there. That will conclude our Q&A practice.